Welcome back to another Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into our source materials to uncover this totally fascinating tension between rigid, unbending rules and the messy, chaotic realities of human life. We're going to look at what happens when strict literalism faces off against common sense, and exactly how our systems adapt when the letter of the law completely misses the spirit of the law. So think about it. Can a perfect rule actually survive reality? It's a massive clash that defines how our society, our courts, and even our most cutting-edge technology ultimately function. Today, we're mapping this out in 5 parts. 1. The limits of literalism. 2. The snail in the bottle. 3. Citrus groves and economic substance. 4. Textualism versus proposivism. And 5. Smart contracts and human judgment. Part 1. The limits of literalism, when strict formalism meets reality. Okay, formalism. It's a really tempting idea, right? The belief that if we just stick to the literal text, follow the rules exactly as written, everything is going to be fair, stable, and totally predictable. It's basically the dream of treating the law like a flawless, perfect math equation. But here's the thing. That dream eventually breaks down. When you're dealing with complex statutory interpretation, just looking at fixed text isn't enough. It's kind of like trying to decode garbled battlefield communications. The rigid, literal words alone, they just can't capture the chaotic, real-world situations they're supposed to govern. Context is everything. Section 2. The snail in the bottle, physical reality and the law of negligence. Picture this. It's 1928 in Paisley, Scotland. A woman named May Donahue is sitting in a cafe, drinking an opaque bottle of ginger beer that her friend bought for her. But hidden at the bottom of that bottle, a decomposing snail. Yeah, gross. She gets severely ill. But here's the wild catch. Because her friend bought the drink, May didn't have a direct contract with the cafe or the manufacturer. And under the incredibly strict literal rules of the time, she had absolutely zero legal recourse. None. Well, the House of Lords looked at this and realized the outcome was just completely absurd. They had to pivot. So they bypassed that strict formal boundary of privity of contract, which said you absolutely needed a direct contractual link to sue, and they created a brand new functional doctrine instead, the duty of care. This is where we get Lord Atkin's famous neighbor principle. He essentially ruled that you must not injure your neighbor, and he defined neighbor super broadly, basically anyone who is closely and directly affected by your actions. It was a massive, game-changing shift. It proved that the law literally has to evolve beyond arbitrary forms to actually protect the physical reality of human safety. Section 3. Citrus groves and economic substance. Financial reality versus contractual labels. Let's jump to 1940s Florida to see how this exact same tension plays out with money. The Howey Company was selling tiny plots of citrus groves to buyers, and they bundled them with service contracts to harvest and market the fruit. The promoters slapped a real estate contract label on the whole thing, basically hoping to completely dodge federal securities regulations. But the Supreme Court, they weren't fooled at all. They looked right past the fancy label and zoomed in on the actual economic substance. And the result of that clash was the Howey test. It's a flexible checklist we still use today. It asks, is there an investment of money in a common enterprise with the expectation of profits driven primarily by the efforts of others? If the answer is yes, well, it's a security. The court chose to formalize economic reality over clever contractual disguises to make sure real investments are actually regulated. You can actually see this functional test actively applied in complex, modern scenarios, like analyzing viatical settlements in legal reviews. It shows just how deeply courts are willing to probe into the actual substance of a financial transaction, rather than just blindly accepting whatever the paperwork claims it is. The big takeaway here is that Congress and the courts flat out refuse to be boxed in by strict legal formalism. They know that just awkwardly forcing a rigid test onto a messy reality is going to fail, so the emphasis is always on digging into the functional attributes of the underlying economics. Section 4. Textualism versus purposivism, the modern interpretive debate. Now, this exact tension sits right at the heart of how modern judges read the law today. We've got 2 main camps. On one side, there's textualism, famously championed by figures like Justice Scalia, which relies entirely on the plain, literal meaning of the words to guarantee predictability. And opposing it is purposivism. They argue that if you just blindly ignore the social context, the history, and the original intent, you're inevitably going to end up with absurd, ridiculous outcomes. Purposivists like legal scholars Hart and Sachs, make a really interesting point. They argue we have to assume lawmakers are reasonable people who intend reasonable results for the public interest. They don't look at laws as just cold, isolated mathematical commands. Instead, they see them as purposeful directives that are actually meant to achieve sound, practical outcomes for society. But when a legal provision is just fundamentally murky, pure logic and formalist reasoning just kind of hit a brick wall. That's the absolute limit of literalism. When the words themselves aren't clear, judges can't just rely on a dictionary. They inevitably have to weigh real-world policy considerations and the broader context to figure it out. Section 5. Smart Contracts and Human Judgment, the Future of Algorithmic Code. Today, technology is serving up a brand new version of the stream, the idea of absolute literalism, where code is law. We're talking about smart contracts. These are self-executing agreements running on decentralized blockchain networks that trigger automatically based on pre-programmed conditions. The whole point is that they are mathematically immune to human intervention. It's pure digital formalism. It attempts to totally atomize the contractual process and just strip away all the messy unpredictability of human judges. But remember the snail in the bottle or the citrus groves? Algorithmic code runs into those exact same struggles when it crashes into reality. You literally just cannot write a line of code for every single unforeseen, weird human nuance. And because of that, human lawyers and judges remain the ultimate stewards of authorship. Even with this massive explosion in automation, human interpretation is just completely irreplaceable. We need it to navigate all those complex, uncodable concepts, things like substantive justice, safety, and the basic pursuit of happiness. Which leaves us with one pretty massive question to ponder. If code truly becomes law, who interprets the golden rule? Algorithms are incredibly good at executing transactions flawlessly, for sure. But ultimately, only human judgment can measure those transactions against the friction of reality and the true spirit of the law. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember, always look beyond the literal text.